The alien queen sat on her throne, her piercing eyes scanning the human who had been brought before her. The room was large and cold, filled with the presence of the alien aristocrats who ruled over the galaxy. The queen, a being of immense power, had seen countless species, but she found humans laughable. They were primitive in their technology, their social structures, and most of all, their biology. "You call yourself fertile," the queen sneered, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Your species is weak. Your reproduction is inefficient. In our empire, we do not reproduce like you do. We control our offspring. Our genetic future is designed. You, humans, are at the mercy of nature." The human before her, a soldier from Earth, remained calm despite the alien queen's harsh words. He had been captured during a mission on a distant planet, taken aboard the alien warship, and now stood before the most powerful creature in the galaxy. His name was John, and he was a man who had faced countless battles. But this was different. This was an alien queen, and she was mocking something deeply personal: human fertility. John looked up at her, meeting her gaze with an unwavering confidence. "You may think that our way is inefficient," he said, his voice steady. "But humans have survived against odds that would destroy most species. We've thrived through our ability to adapt, to care for each other, and to fight for what's ours. You may think our biology is weak, but it's what's kept us going." The queen raised an eyebrow. Her expression was one of disdain, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. She had never encountered a human who spoke so boldly, so confidently. She had studied their biology, their systems, and yet there was something about them, something she couldn't quite grasp. "Humans adapt, yes, but what do you really have?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Your bodies are fragile. Your fertility is uncontrolled. You are prisoners to your own biology." John didn't flinch. "Maybe you're right," he said, "but we've never been afraid to face our weaknesses. We face them head-on. And we fight. We fight for each other, for our future." The queen studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. She had never understood human resilience, their ability to continue, even when faced with certain death. It was unlike anything she had ever seen in any other species, but it also made her uneasy. If humans were as strong as they claimed, perhaps they were more dangerous than she had first believed. The queen turned her gaze to her advisors, signaling them to continue with their tests. "We shall see how your species truly compares to mine," she said, dismissing the conversation with a flick of her hand. But John couldn't shake the feeling that the queen had taken an unusual interest in him, despite her dismissive words. As the guards escorted him away, John couldn't help but wonder what had just happened. The queen's words had stung, but he knew one thing for sure. She had underestimated humans, and he was going to show her that they were capable of more than anyone ever imagined. The days following their first encounter were tense. The alien queen, though outwardly confident, couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled in her mind after meeting the human soldier. His words echoed in her thoughts, as did the strength in his gaze. No one had ever spoken to her with such defiance, yet there was something about his conviction that intrigued her. At first, she tried to ignore it. She was the queen of a powerful empire, a being who had seen and conquered countless worlds. She was not supposed to be affected by the words of a mere human. But there it was again. The feeling that something about him was different, something she couldn't quite understand. Her advisors had arranged for further tests on the human soldier. He had been kept in a containment chamber, monitored carefully, and studied for days. The queen had ordered his genetic material to be examined, looking for any unusual traits or abnormalities that could explain his boldness. She had expected to find nothing. After all, humans were primitive creatures, right? But when the results came in, they were unexpected. The human soldier's genetic makeup wasn't like anything she had encountered before. There was something strange in his DNA, a hidden potential that her scientists couldn't explain. It wasn't the usual markers she had seen in other species. His cells showed an almost unearthly resilience, a regenerative power that her experts couldn't replicate in their labs. The Queen sat in her private chambers, the holographic display in front of her showing the results. She stared at the data for a long time, her mind racing. Could this human really be different? Could his biology hold some kind of key that her species didn't possess? She couldn't afford to ignore it. The Queen's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Her chief advisor, a tall, reptilian alien, entered the room, bowing low. "My Queen," he said, "there is something else. The human, he seems unaffected by the confinement. His stress levels are minimal. His body shows signs of unusual adaptability, far beyond what we've observed in other species." The Queen frowned. "Unusual adaptability," she repeated, her voice cold. "Yes," the advisor continued, "his body seems to adjust to changes in his environment faster than anything we've seen. It's as though his physiology can evolve in real time." The Queen's frown deepened. This was not what she had expected. She had dismissed the human as weak, a species destined to fade away under the weight of galactic powers. Yet here he was, showing signs of something far greater than she had ever anticipated. "And what of his reproductive potential?" the Queen asked, her voice tight with curiosity. The advisor hesitated before replying. "It's impossible to predict. We've never seen anything like it. But there are theories that his species might be capable of adapting their reproductive systems based on environmental factors. It might explain why they're so resilient." The Queen's eyes narrowed. Could the human soldier's fertility be the key to everything? She had laughed at the idea of human fertility before, but now she wasn't so sure. If his biology was truly unique, what else could he be capable of? "Keep watching him," the Queen ordered. "There's more to this human than I thought, and I intend to find out what it is." As the advisor left the room, the Queen felt a strange sense of unease. She had underestimated the human. And now, as she pondered the possibilities, she wondered if this encounter would be the turning point in her life, or the galaxy's. The alien Queen had never expected this. She had ruled over vast galaxies for centuries, surrounded by power and control. The idea of human reproduction, something so raw and unrefined, had always been a source of amusement to her. But now, in the quiet of her private chambers, she was forced to confront something far beyond her understanding. The first signs came slowly. At first, she brushed them off as nothing more than a fleeting discomfort, a temporary disturbance in her own complex biology. But as the days went by, the symptoms became harder to ignore. She felt nauseous, tired, and strange. There was a deep, persistent ache in her abdomen that she couldn't explain. The Queen was accustomed to perfect control over her body, but this was different. She called for her personal physician, an expert in alien anatomy who had served her for decades. The physician, a small insect-like creature, entered the chamber with its usual swift movements, but the Queen could see the unease in its eyes. It was not a look the Queen was used to seeing, especially not directed at her. "My Queen," the physician began hesitantly, "there appears to be something unusual happening within you." The Queen stiffened. "Unusual," she repeated, her voice cold with authority. "What do you mean?" The physician hesitated for a moment before stepping forward and activating a small device that scanned the Queen's body. The results came in swiftly, far too swiftly for the Queen to ignore. She stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. There, inside her, was something that shouldn't be possible. A human fetus. Impossible. I don't understand," the physician stammered, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly. "This cannot be. There is no known record of such a thing in our archives. The biological compatibility between your species and humans. It is not meant to be." The Queen felt her heart race, her pulse quicken. She reached out to the screen, her fingers trembling as she touched the image of the tiny being growing inside her. It was real. It was happening. Her mind raced. How could this be? The last time she had seen the human soldier, There was no sign of anything unusual. She had mocked him, laughed at the idea of human fertility. Yet now she was carrying his child. An alien queen, pregnant with the offspring of a human. The thought was both terrifying and strangely thrilling. She had to act quickly. The implications of this pregnancy were enormous. Her empire, her people, they would never accept this. Her own advisors would see it as a threat to her power. But deep down, she felt something stir inside her that she had never felt before. Something unfamiliar, something soft. The queen clenched her fists, shaking off the unsettling emotions. She was a ruler. She couldn't afford to show weakness, but deep within her, she couldn't deny that the human soldier's influence was already taking hold of her in ways she never expected. "What will you do, my queen?" the physician asked, his voice trembling. She straightened, her eyes hardening. "Keep this information secret. I will handle it," she replied firmly, though even she wasn't sure what that meant. She had no plan, no idea what to do next. But one thing was clear: her world was about to change, and there was no turning back. The weeks passed, and the alien queen's growing pregnancy could no longer be hidden. It was impossible to ignore the changes happening within her. Every day, the reality of the situation settled deeper into her mind, and with it came a storm of confusion, fear, and something far more unsettling, a sense of attachment she had never known. The queen's once calm and composed demeanor began to slip. She found herself growing impatient, restless, even irritable. Her advisors and officials, once loyal and obedient, now found themselves walking on eggshells around her, sensing the tension in the air. But none of them knew the true reason for her unease. None of them knew about the child growing inside her, except for her trusted physician, who had been sworn to secrecy. She spent many long hours alone in her chambers, staring at the holographic images of the human soldier, John, who had unknowingly changed the course of her life. How could this be happening? She had always been in control of her own destiny. And yet now her body was betraying her, carrying the child of a species she had long thought inferior. She had once mocked the human soldier, laughed at his race's ability to reproduce naturally. Her own people had long since perfected the art of selective breeding, creating life in controlled scientific environments. And yet here she was, pregnant with something so primal, so raw, that it defied her entire understanding of biology. And the child, she couldn't explain why. But as the days passed, the idea of the child growing inside her began to feel important. Something inside her shifted, a bond forming with the unborn life, even though she couldn't explain it. This wasn't just a biological accident. It was something more, something she couldn't put into words. The queen paced the room, her mind spinning. What would her empire think of her? What would her people say if they discovered she was carrying a human child? They would see it as a weakness, a betrayal, a sign that their queen, the ruler of all, had allowed herself to be polluted. She thought back to the soldiers who had captured John. They were fierce and loyal, but they had laughed at him too, calling him weak. They would never understand. Her own council, the ones who guided her empire, would never accept this. They were proud of their superiority, their perfect breeding methods. They would see this child as a threat to their power, a weakness that could bring their entire empire down. The queen clenched her fists in frustration, her claws digging into her palms. She had always been strong, decisive, and unyielding. She had conquered worlds, commanded armies, and shaped the destiny of her people. And now, a human child, of all things, was threatening everything she had built. She paced again, her thoughts spiraling. But then, in a quiet moment of reflection, she realized something. Despite all the fear, all the uncertainty, she couldn't bear the thought of losing this child. Something deep inside her refused to let go, to abandon the life growing within her. The queen stopped in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She had never been one to show weakness, but now, in the privacy of her chambers, she allowed herself to feel it. For the first time, she wasn't sure what to do. The future of her empire was at stake. Her reign was in jeopardy. But as she stood there, she couldn't help but wonder, was this child the key to something greater? Something that could unite her people with the humans, something that could change the course of the galaxy itself. The queen had spent weeks hiding the truth from her advisors, from her people. No one knew about the child growing inside her, and she intended to keep it that way. Yet the more she tried to ignore it, the more the reality of the situation seeped into her thoughts. She couldn't run from it forever. One evening, alone in her private chambers, the queen received an unexpected visit from her most trusted advisor, Lord Xeros. His loyalty to her had been unwavering, and he had been by her side since the beginning of her reign. He was an imposing figure, tall and fierce, with scales that shimmered in the dim light of her chamber. "My queen," Lord Xeros said, bowing deeply as he entered the room. "There have been rumors. The soldiers and scientists report strange findings about the human, about you. I must insist that we speak. What is happening?" The queen's heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it to be so soon. Lord Xeros was loyal, but he was also incredibly perceptive. She knew he would sense something was wrong, especially given the reports from her medical team about her condition. She glanced down at her hands, unsure how to proceed. There was no easy way to explain what had happened. The pregnancy was too extraordinary, too impossible to understand. "Lord Xeros, you are right," she began, her voice calm but laced with tension. "Something has happened. Something I never anticipated." She could see the concern growing in his eyes, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. The queen took a deep breath and stood tall. She had to be strong, for her people, for her empire, but for once she felt unsure. "I carry a human child," she confessed, her voice steady, but filled with a deep, uneasy truth. Lord Xeros blinked in shock. "A human child?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "But that is impossible. How could such a thing happen?" "You—" "I do not know," she interrupted, shaking her head. "But it is real. The child grows inside me, and there is no denying it." She paused, her thoughts racing. "I don't understand it, Xeros. It defies all logic. My people will never accept it. Our laws, our beliefs, they do not allow for such things." Lord Xeros stood in stunned silence, processing her words. The queen could see the conflict in his eyes. He was torn between loyalty to her and the deep-rooted traditions of their people. He had always been one to follow the rules, to maintain order, but this was something far beyond his understanding. "You must eliminate it," he finally said, his voice cold and firm, though tinged with sadness. "If the child is allowed to live, the entire empire could be thrown into chaos. The people will rebel. The threat to your throne will be too great." The queen's heart clenched at his words. She knew he was right. She knew the risks. But in that moment, she also knew that she couldn't bring herself to do it. A strange protectiveness had taken hold of her, and it was growing stronger every day. "No," she said, her voice firm for the first time in days. "I will not destroy this child. There is something about this, something I cannot explain. I will find another way." Lord Xeros stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer. "Then you are willing to risk everything for this child?" The queen's gaze hardened, determination flooding her body. "Yes," she replied. "I am. I do not know what this means, but I will protect this child. And I will protect the future, no matter what it costs." Lord Xeros bowed again, his respect for her growing in that moment. "Then I will stand by you, my queen. But know this, there are those who will never accept this. You must be prepared for what comes next." The queen nodded, a quiet resolve settling in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. She would fight for the life inside her, and for the future of her empire. The days turned into weeks, and the queen's decision to protect the child inside her began to feel heavier with each passing moment. She had dismissed her advisor's warnings, choosing instead to stand firm in her resolve. But as the weeks wore on, something unexpected began to stir within her. The feeling was new to her. The queen, who had never allowed emotion to cloud her decisions, now found herself drawn to the unborn child growing inside her. It wasn't just the sense of responsibility that weighed on her. It was something more profound, something she hadn't anticipated. A growing affection. She couldn't explain it, but it was there, deep within her. The connection she felt to the child felt almost natural, despite its human origins. She spent hours alone, reflecting on her decision. Every time she touched her abdomen, she could feel a warmth that spread through her, a bond that had taken root inside her heart. This child, this symbol of the unthinkable alliance between her species and the humans, was becoming more than just a strange occurrence. It was becoming a part of her. Yet, despite this growing bond, the queen knew that the galaxy would not understand. Her people would never accept a half-human heir to the throne. She had been raised to believe in the superiority of her species, to see humans as weak and inferior. To even think that she, the queen of the galaxy, was carrying a human child felt like a betrayal to everything she had been taught. But that didn't change the truth. The child was real, and she couldn't deny it. And now, for the first time in her life, she was torn between her duty as a queen, her duty to her empire, and the growing love she felt for this child. She could no longer see the child as just a political tool. It was part of her. The queen stood before her mirror, her reflection staring back at her. She saw the confident ruler, the conqueror of worlds. But now, there was something new in her eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't shown in centuries. She could no longer ignore the truth. She was changing. As she walked through the palace halls, she found herself stopping at the room where John, the human soldier, was being kept. She had ordered him to remain in his quarters for the time being, not wanting anyone to see the connection that was growing between them. But she couldn't help it. The curiosity and the strange pull toward him were becoming impossible to ignore. When she entered his quarters, John was sitting by the window, looking out at the stars. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He had grown used to her visits, though they were still rare. "Your Majesty," he greeted her, his voice calm and respectful. The queen stood still for a moment, unsure of what to say. The emotions swirling inside her made it hard to focus. "I need answers," she finally said, her voice more vulnerable than she intended. "I need to understand why this is happening. Why? Why is this child so important?" John turned to look at her, his expression softening. "I wish I could give you the answers you need, Your Majesty. I don't understand it myself. But I do know this: humans, we care. We care deeply for those we love, for those we protect. Maybe it's not about what's logical. Maybe it's about something deeper." The queen was silent for a long moment, processing his words. She had never thought about it that way. Everything in her life had always been about control, about strategy, about power. But John's words were a reminder that humans lived with something different, something she had never fully understood. "I don't know what this means for me or for my empire," she said quietly. "But I can't let go of the idea that this child is something I need to protect." John nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "You're not alone in this. You don't have to be." The queen's chest tightened at his words. She had never allowed anyone to stand beside her in such a way. She had always been alone, surrounded by loyal followers, but never by someone who saw her for who she truly was. She looked at John, not just as a soldier, not just as the man who had unknowingly fathered her child, but as someone who truly understood her struggle. And for the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this child wasn't the only thing she had to protect. She had been alone for so long, but now she felt the stirrings of a future that wasn't defined by power alone. It was a future that could be shaped by love, by connection, and by the choices she made to stand by those who mattered most. The Queen's decision to protect her unborn child had set the stage for a confrontation she had never anticipated. As her pregnancy progressed, so did the whispers of unrest within the empire. The high-ranking officials, the military commanders, and even some of her most trusted allies had begun to question her leadership. There were those who believed that the birth of a human child, no matter the circumstances, was a sign of weakness, an act of betrayal. The Queen paced through her palace, her sharp gaze flicking over the maps of her empire laid out before her. The empire she had built, the empire she had ruled with an iron fist, was now threatened not by an external force, but by internal rebellion. Her decision had already sparked a ripple of doubt in her leadership, and she knew it was only a matter of time before those who sought power would use this as a means to challenge her. Lord Syros, the advisor who had once urged her to end the pregnancy, stood by her side in the war room. His expression was hard to read, but the tension in his posture was clear. "My queen," he began, his voice low, the whispers have turned into open dissent. "Your decision to keep the child, the human child, is being seen as an act of defiance against our people's traditions." The Queen's jaw tightened. She had heard the rumors, the quiet murmurs in the hallways, and the reports from her spies. She had known this would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel real, something she couldn't ignore. "I am the Queen," she replied, her voice calm but laced with authority. "No one questions my decisions." Lord Syros nodded, but there was a trace of doubt in his eyes. "There are those who will. The council, the military elite. They fear what this child represents. They fear what it means for the future of the empire. A human hair could change everything. The unity of the empire could be shattered." The Queen clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had always known that power was fragile, but she had never thought it would come to this, a threat from within her own ranks. Her people had always followed her, had always revered her strength and wisdom. But now, that reverence was slipping away. "I will not allow them to dictate my choices," she said firmly. "This child is mine, and I will protect it." Syros hesitated, his eyes flicking to the door. "There are more drastic measures being considered, my queen. If you refuse to let go of this child, there are those who may choose to act. They may see this as a challenge to the throne itself." The Queen's heart raced. She had known there were factions who would oppose her decision, but the thought that her own people might rise against her in open rebellion was a bitter pill to swallow. She had never been a queen who bowed to threats, but this was different. This wasn't an invasion from an enemy star system. This was betrayal from within her closest circle. "I won't let them take what's mine," she said, her voice steely with determination. "I'll face them head on." As the Queen turned away, her mind began to race. She had been prepared for war. She had led her people into countless battles, each one harder than the last. But this was different. This wasn't about strategy or military might. This was about something more profound, something she had never expected to fight for: love, connection, and the future of a child she had come to protect with every fiber of her being. The time for diplomacy had passed. It was no longer about keeping her empire united. It was about survival. Her survival, and the survival of the future she had never imagined she would have to defend. "I will not be defeated," she whispered to herself as she looked out over the stars, a quiet resolve settling in her heart. Not by anyone. The Queen had made her decision. No matter the cost, she would protect her child, and she would stand by her choice. It was a stance that would change everything. No longer would she be the ruler everyone expected her to be. She was something different now, more than a queen, more than a conqueror. She was a mother, and she would fight for her child. The whispers of rebellion that had once been mere murmurs now became louder. The council was in uproar, and the military leaders were growing restless. The empire was splitting, divided between those who still supported the Queen and those who feared the unknown consequences of a human child on the throne. For the first time in her reign, the Queen felt the weight of true isolation. Her closest allies were now her biggest threats. But she would not back down. The queen called for a meeting with her most trusted generals and officials, those who had stood by her for years. She knew it would be a dangerous meeting, one that could determine her future and the future of the empire. The room was filled with tension as she entered, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who had once sworn loyalty to her. Now many of them looked at her with suspicion. "My queen," General Kor, one of her most seasoned commanders, began. His tone was respectful, but his words were laced with caution. "We are all loyal to you, but there are forces at play here that we cannot ignore. This child, this human child, will not be accepted by the Empire. It will divide us. It could bring everything we've worked for crashing down." The queen met his gaze without flinching. She had expected this. She had known they would come to her with their concerns, their fears, but she had already made her decision. "I will not let my child be a symbol of division," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "This child will be the future of our empire, and I will ensure that my people understand that. I will not let them destroy what I've built." The room fell silent. The generals exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to speak out against her. They knew what she was capable of. The queen had led them to countless victories, and her strength was legendary. But this was different. This was not a war with external enemies. This was a battle for her throne, for her future, and for the future of her child. General Kor spoke again, his voice softer now. "My queen, if you insist on keeping this child, we must prepare for the consequences. There will be those who will seek to take advantage of your vulnerability. They will see this as an opportunity to challenge your authority." The queen's gaze hardened. "Then we will be ready," she said, her voice cold and resolute. "I will not let anyone tear my family apart. If it means facing those who once served me, so be it." Her words were like a declaration of war. The room shifted, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of her resolve. The generals, once unsure, now looked to her with a renewed sense of purpose. They had followed her into battles before, but this was a different kind of fight, one that would test not only their loyalty, but their faith in her vision for the future. "My queen, we will stand by you," General Kor said, bowing his head. "We will fight for you, and for the future you've chosen." The queen nodded, a rare smile flickering at the corner of her lips. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Her child, the symbol of an uncertain future, had already begun to change the empire. And no matter what happened, she would ensure that the child was given the chance to shape that future. The air in the queen's private chamber was thick with tension. She had waited for this moment, the moment when her child would be born. But now that it was almost here, she felt a surge of nervous energy unlike any she had ever known. Her empire, her people, her future, all of it had come down to this one moment. And despite everything she had faced, despite the threats and doubts, she was determined that this child would be born into a new world, a world she would build. The queen had gathered her closest allies in the palace. General Kor stood at her side, his expression unreadable, but his presence reassuring. Beside him were several of her most trusted officials and medical experts who had been preparing for this day for weeks. They all knew the importance of what was about to happen, but none of them fully understood the significance as the queen did. This child, half human, half alien, was not just an heir. It was a symbol of unity, of change, and of the future of the galaxy. The queen sat upon her royal bed, the chamber dimly lit by the soft glow of star maps and holographic projections. Despite the calm atmosphere, there was an electric energy in the air. She could feel the child moving inside her, a reminder of the life that had grown against all odds, against all expectations. The moment was drawing near. The child, her child, would soon be born. As the queen braced herself, she thought back to the first time she had felt this child's presence, when the doubts had still lingered, when the decision to protect this life had felt like a gamble. And yet now, she could not imagine a future without it. The bond she had formed with the child inside her had only deepened over time. It was as though their souls were intertwined, destined to share a fate beyond what either of them had known. Hours passed. The queen's breathing slowed, and her mind became focused. This was no longer about her empire, about politics, or about her people's expectations. This was about a new life, a new hope, and the promise she had made to herself and to her child that nothing, no rebellion, no threat, could take it away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the child was born. It was a quiet moment, free from the chaos that had surrounded the queen for so long. She held the newborn in her arms, her heart pounding as she gazed down at the child. Its features were a mix of her own and the human soldier, John. Pale blue skin, sharp alien eyes, and the delicate traces of human ancestry. The child was perfect. For the first time in what felt like forever, the queen felt at peace. All the fear, all the uncertainty, seemed to vanish in that moment. This child, this symbol of a new era, was her legacy. She could feel the weight of the future pressing against her, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a new beginning. Her eyes met General Cor's, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a smile of conquest or battle, but a genuine smile of recognition. He had seen the queen rise to power through sheer strength, but now he saw something else. He saw hope. "This child," the queen whispered, her voice filled with awe, "will change everything." General Cor nodded. "It already has, my queen. This is only the beginning." The queen looked down at her newborn, a feeling of overwhelming love and pride filling her chest. She knew that the challenges ahead would be great. There would still be those who resisted her rule, those who feared the future this child represented. But for the first time, she was certain. This was her legacy. And with this child, she would create a new empire, one where the old divisions no longer mattered, where humans and aliens could unite, side by side, and build something greater than either species could have achieved alone. The queen took a deep breath and held her child close. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would face it head-on, with love in her heart and a promise to her child that the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy had shifted, though no one fully understood it yet. The queen, once a ruler feared across the stars, now sat in the quiet of her chambers, gazing down at the child in her arms. The soft glow of the stars outside the window reflected on the pale blue skin of her newborn. It was a symbol of everything that had changed in her life, a life that no longer revolved solely around power or conquest, but around something deeper, something she never expected to find. The council had been silent for days after the birth, each member reflecting on the enormity of the queen's decision. There were still those who whispered in the shadows, questioning her ability to rule, questioning the future of the empire. They saw the child as a threat to their long-held beliefs, a disruption to the order they had known for centuries. But for the first time in her reign, the queen was not worried about their opinions. She had made her choice, and she would stand by it. As she looked down at her child, the queen could feel a deep connection, a bond she had never known was possible. This child, with the mixture of her alien blood and human heritage, had brought with it a new sense of purpose. It was more than just a symbol of unity. It was her reason to change the galaxy, to unite two worlds that had never seen eye to eye. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. General Cor entered, his expression serious, but not without respect. "My queen," he began, bowing his head. "The council wishes to speak with you." The queen nodded, gently cradling her child in her arms. She knew this moment would come. The council could no longer ignore what had happened. They would either accept her decision or challenge her rule. There was no middle ground. But as she stood, her resolve strengthened. She would not be swayed. The queen entered the council chamber, the room now filled with the most powerful beings in the empire. They looked at her with uncertainty, their eyes lingering on the child in her arms. There was silence before one of the senior officials, High Advisor Tarl, spoke up. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice low but firm. This is unprecedented. A human child. Half human, half alien. It is a challenge to everything we have known." The Queen's gaze was steady. "It is not a challenge," she said calmly. "It is the future. I will not stand by while my empire continues to divide itself over petty differences. This child is not a threat. It is a hope that we can unite, that we can move past our old divisions and build something greater." High Advisor Tarl's eyes narrowed. "And what of the humans? They are not our people. They do not belong in this empire." The Queen's voice remained strong. "The future does not belong to any one race or species. It belongs to those who are willing to change, to adapt. The humans are our allies now, not our enemies. And this child represents that future." There was a long pause as the council members exchanged uncertain glances. The Queen could feel their hesitation, but she also saw something else in their eyes. A shift. They had always respected her power, but now, for the first time, they were beginning to understand the weight of her decision. This was not just about a child. It was about the future of the empire. Finally, General Kor stepped forward. "We are with you, Your Majesty. We stand by your decision." The council fell silent. One by one, the members nodded, their resistance slowly crumbling in the face of the Queen's unwavering resolve. The Queen smiled softly, holding her child close. "Then we begin. This is a new beginning for all of us. Together, we will create a future where we are stronger, united, and unbroken." And with that, the Queen, the child, and the empire began a new chapter in their history. A chapter where the lines between species no longer divided them, but united them. The galaxy had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again.